The last thing a mother ever expects is to find her own daughter crumpled on her doorstep like a discarded doll, her eyes wide with the terror that didn't recognize the very face that had brought her into this world. When I opened my door that rainy Tuesday night, my Emily, my bright, sharp, fiercely independent girl, looked up at me with the blank, lost gaze of a complete stranger. She was clutching a water-stained envelope, her knuckles white, and the only words she could manage before she fainted were, "I don't know who I am." In that moment, the quiet, predictable life I had built for myself shattered into a million pieces. And I had no idea that her lost memories were just the opening chapter of a nightmare orchestrated by the one person I had always known was a monster. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. My name is Carol, and until that night, my biggest concern was whether my hydrangeas would survive the unusually hot Florida summer. I'm 66, retired from a 30-year career as a high school librarian, and I'm what you'd call methodical. I label my spice jars alphabetically. I balance my checkbook to the penny. My life runs on schedules and predictable outcomes, something that often drove my free-spirited daughter crazy. Emily was my opposite, all impulse and passion. She chased her dreams of being a graphic designer with a fire I both admired and feared. She loved big, she hurt big, and when she fell for Mark, she fell hard. I never liked Mark. From the day Emily brought him home, he set off every alarm bell a mother has. He was too smooth, too charming. His smiles never quite reached his eyes, and he had a way of complimenting you that felt like a subtle insult. He was a real estate developer, and he wore his ambition like an expensive suit, flashy and a little too tight. Emily, of course, was smitten. She saw confidence where I saw arrogance. She saw ambition where I saw ruthless greed. I tried to warn her in my quiet, roundabout way, but trying to talk a daughter out of a man she loves is like trying to stop a hurricane with a screen door. They were married for 6 years. I spent those 6 years watching my daughter's bright light slowly dim, her laughter become a little less frequent, her calls a little more strained. When she finally told me they were divorcing, the relief I felt was so profound it made me feel guilty. The divorce was finalized just 8 months before she showed up at my door. After her collapse, the hospital was a whirlwind of sterile smells and hushed, serious conversations. The doctors were stumped at first. Physically, she was fine, apart from some dehydration and exhaustion. But her mind had locked away a huge part of itself. The official diagnosis came a day later: dissociative amnesia, a fugue state. Dr. Ramirez, a kind woman with tired eyes, explained it was the brain's way of protecting itself from a severe trauma. She said something happened, something so distressing that her mind has essentially sealed it off. The last thing Emily remembered with any clarity was her 25th birthday. She was 32. She had no memory of her last 7 years on this earth. The years she'd built her career, the years she'd spent married to Mark. To her, the man whose name was still listed as her emergency contact was a complete stranger. And then he walked in. Mark. He strode into that hospital room smelling of expensive cologne and false concern. He had his devastated husband face on, a mask he wore so perfectly. He rushed to her bedside, grabbing her hand. "Emily, honey, thank God. I've been so worried." Emily flinched, pulling her hand away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes darting to me for help. Do I know you?" The flicker of annoyance in Mark's eyes was so fast I almost missed it, but it was there. He recovered instantly, his face melting into a look of theatrical heartbreak. "It's me, darling. It's Mark, your husband." He didn't mention the divorce. Not a word. The lie hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I stepped forward, and my was tight. Mark What are you doing? They're divorced.
He turned to me, his smile condescending. Carol, please, she's been through enough. Let's not confuse her with legal technicalities. He turned to the doctor, his voice smooth as silk. We've had our issues, sure. What couple hasn't? But we were working on them. This changes everything. I'm here to take care of my wife. The doctor, a young resident who probably saw a handsome, well-dressed man doting on his sick wife, nodded sympathetically. Mark had always been a master at playing a part. He knew exactly which strings to pull to make people see him as the hero. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. I felt like I was screaming into a soundproof box. I tried to explain to the doctors, to the nurses, to anyone who would listen that Mark was her ex-husband. I told them he was manipulative and controlling, that this was the worst possible environment for her recovery. I even brought a copy of the divorce decree. Mark just waved it off. A moment of madness, Doc. We both regretted it. We were reconciling. He produced text messages conveniently edited that made it look like they were working things out. He painted me as the bitter, meddling mother-in-law who never approved of their love. And it worked. The hospital staff started treating me with a polite but firm distance. I was the difficult family member. He was the loving spouse. Emily was trapped in the middle. Her brain was a jumble of half-formed feelings and instincts. Part of her was terrified of this man who claimed to be her husband, yet she was also desperately clinging to anything that felt certain. Mark would sit by her bed for hours, telling her stories about their life. They were curated memories, of course, a gallery of perfect moments, exotic vacations, romantic dinners, laughing with friends. He left out the shouting matches, the broken dishes, the nights she called me crying from a hotel room because she was too scared to go home. He was rewriting history, and she was a blank canvas he could paint on however he chose. The real fight began when the hospital prepared to discharge her. She needs to be in a familiar environment, Dr. Ramirez said, looking at Mark. It's the best chance she has of triggering her memories. She'll come home with me, of course, Mark said, placing a possessive hand on Emily's shoulder. My blood ran cold. No, I said, my voice sharp. Absolutely not. She'll come home with me. Carol, be reasonable, Mark said, his tone dripping with fake patience. Our home is where she belongs. Her things are there. Her whole life is there. Being in a strange place, even with you, could set her back. He was spinning it, making me sound like the selfish one. We argued back and forth right there in the hallway, our voices getting tighter and louder. I begged the doctor to understand. I told her Emily had moved out months ago and had her own apartment, an apartment she no longer remembered. But Mark had an answer for everything. He was selling her place, he lied smoothly. Part of her moving back in. I have the keys. I've been taking care of her cat. It was a dizzying web of lies, and he wove it so effortlessly. In the end, it came down to a piece of paper. His name was still on some of the old medical forms as her primary contact and spouse. The divorce was recent enough that not everything had been updated. He had a key to their old marital home. Legally, I had no leg to stand on. My own daughter, in her confused and fragile state, was easily swayed. He promised her she'd feel safe, that everything would come back to her if she just came home. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for an answer I couldn't give her, and whispered, "Maybe he's right, Mom." Watching him lead her out of that hospital was one of the hardest moments of my life. He had this smug, triumphant look on his face that he tried to hide, but I saw it. He'd won. He had my daughter, my vulnerable, memory-wiped daughter, completely under his control. I went home to my empty house that night, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't just feel angry. I felt a cold, calculating rage begin to build in my chest. He thought he'd outsmarted me. He thought he'd gotten away with it. But Mark made one critical miscalculation. He assumed the quiet, organized librarian was a pushover. He was about to find out how wrong he was.
The first few days were a study in frustration. I left messages on Emily's cell phone that went unanswered. When I called the landline at the house, a number I still knew by heart, Mark would answer, his voice dripping with false empathy. "Oh, hi, Carol," he'd say, a little too brightly. "Em's just resting now. The doctor said she needs minimal stress, you know." Or, "She's not really up for calls. We're just trying to ease her back into a routine. I'll be sure to tell her you called." He was building a fortress around her, and I was on the outside with no way in. A few times he put her on the phone. The conversations were agonizingly stilted. "Hi, Mom," she'd say, her voice small and uncertain. "Sweetheart, how are you feeling? Are you okay?" I'm fine. Mark is taking very good care of me." I could hear the coaching in her words, the hesitation that told me he was standing right there listening to every syllable. I tried to push gently. "Emily, do you remember your apartment, your pretty little place with the balcony garden?" A pause, a shaky breath. "Mark says we were selling it, that I was moving back in here." "That's not true, honey," I started, my voice desperate. "The divorce was final." "Please don't," she whispered, and her voice was so fragile it broke my heart. "It's too confusing. He says you were just upset about us getting back together." Before I could respond, Mark's smooth voice cut in. "Okay, that's enough for now. Gotta go, Carol. Talk soon." And the line would go dead. He was a master puppeteer, and he had her tangled so completely in his strings. For about a week, I felt that deep, bone-weary helplessness that every parent dreads. I was locked out, and my daughter was locked in with her abuser, an abuser she couldn't even remember. But sitting around wringing my hands has never been my style. When you've spent 30 years helping teenagers find obscure facts for term papers, you learn that no fortress of information is truly impenetrable. You just need to find the right key. For me, that key arrived, as it so often does, in a plain white envelope delivered by the U.S. Postal Service. After Emily had moved into her own apartment post-divorce, she'd had all her mail forwarded to my address for a while, just to make sure nothing important got lost in the shuffle. She'd forgotten to turn off the forwarding, and frankly, so had I. Mostly it was junk mail and alumni magazines. But one afternoon, sorting through the mail on my kitchen counter, I found a letter from a bank I'd never heard of. Silveridge Financial Services. It was addressed to Emily, but the address listed under her name wasn't my house or her apartment. It was the address of the house she used to share with Mark. My hands started to tremble as I held it up to the light. It was thick, filled with documents. Every instinct in my body screamed, trap. Mark wasn't just isolating her, he was using her. But he was about to learn that you don't mess with a librarian who has a search engine and a library card, or a mother bear protecting her cub. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. Legally, I couldn't open her mail. I wrestled with my conscience for about 90 seconds. A mother's duty to protect her child trumps postal regulations every day of the week. I slit the envelope open with a butter knife. Inside was a welcome packet. "Congratulations, Miss Emily Peterson, on your home equity line of credit," it read in cheerful blue script. I sank into a kitchen chair, the linoleum cold against my bare feet. My eyes scanned the numbers, my brain struggling to process them. The loan was for $500,000. A lien against the house that she and Mark had owned together. A house that she and Mark, according to their divorce decree, was supposed to be sold, with the profits split between them. I remembered the fight over that house. Emily had wanted her half of the equity out so she could invest in her own business. Mark had dragged his feet, insisting the market was too soft, that they should wait. Now I knew why. He never intended to sell it. He just needed to get her signature on a new piece of paper. A signature from a woman who didn't even remember she was divorced. Rage is a potent fuel. I made 2 calls. The first was to Sarah, Emily's best friend since their days at the University of Florida. Sarah is a firecracker, a successful marketing executive with a tongue like a razor blade and a loyalty to Emily that was absolute. She had despised Mark even more than I had. "Carol, what's wrong?" she asked, picking up on the first ring.
I laid it all out for her. The amnesia, Mark's deception, the hospital, and now the envelope in my hand. For a full 10 seconds, there was silence on the other end of the line. And then a string of swear words so creative they would have made a sailor blush. "That son of a," she finally finished, taking a breath. Okay, Carol, what's the plan? We're getting her out of there. Tell me what you need." "I need information," I said, the librarian in me taking over. "I need to know what he's into. 500 grand is panic money. Something is going very, very wrong in his world, and he's using Emily as a financial life raft." "Consider it done," Sarah said, her voice turning to steel. "He's been bragging for months about some big new condo development he's building over in the Channelside district. The Avalon, he calls it. Sounds like a good place to start digging." My second call was to a man named David Chen. David had been my student aide in the library nearly 20 years ago. He was a scrawny, brilliant kid who had a knack for finding anything on the still new internet. He'd gone on to become a private investigator. We'd kept in touch over the years, a Christmas card here, an email there. I explained the situation to him. He listened patiently, a deep hum of concentration on his end of the line. When I got to the part about the loan, he let out a low whistle. "That's not just dirty, Carol. That's felony-level fraud. Using a mentally incapacitated person to secure a loan? A good lawyer will have a field day with that. But you need proof. Hard proof that he knew she was incapacitated and that she wouldn't have agreed to it otherwise." "I had to have a notary," I said, looking at the loan document. The signature page had a notary seal and a signature that was little more than an illegible scrawl. Someone had to witness her sign that. "Let me look into this notary," David said, "and start a full financial workup on Mr. Mark Peterson. If he's in a $500,000 hole, there will be tracks. Liens, lawsuits, angry investors, something." That night, Sarah and I convened at my kitchen table, which had now become our war room. With her marketing savvy and my research skills, we started our deep dive. Sarah found the Avalon's glossy promotional website. It promised luxury waterfront living and unparalleled amenities, complete with renderings of happy, beautiful people sipping cocktails by a rooftop pool. But then she started digging into the social media comments on local news sites that had covered the groundbreaking. The tone was different. Subcontractors complaining they hadn't been paid, buyers grumbling about endless delays, rumors of failed inspections. Meanwhile, I was logged into the county clerk's public records portal, a place I knew as well as my own bookshelf. I started with Mark's name. Nothing too unusual at first. Then I searched for his business, Peterson Development, LLC. And there it was, a cascade of red flags. 3 separate liens filed against the company in the last 6 months by a plumbing contractor, an electrician, and a lumber supplier. Combined, they were claiming over $200,000 in unpaid invoices.
He wasn't just in a hole, he was at the bottom of a canyon and the walls were caving in. The final piece clicked into place when I checked the property records for the Avalon site itself. He didn't own the land outright. He was heavily mortgaged to a private commercial lender, Silveridge Financial Services, the same company that had just given Emily a $500,000 line of credit. He wasn't just borrowing money against their old house to pay off his debts. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, taking money from one branch of a predatory lender to satisfy another more urgent debt to them. And he was using my daughter's name and credit to do it. He'd found a loophole. He couldn't get another business loan, but the equity in that house, that was clean. That was his golden ticket. The phone rang, jarring me out of my trance. It was David. "Got something for you for that notary," he said with his voice grim. "Her name is Janet Finch, and guess what? She works as a part-time administrative assistant at Peterson Development."
The line went quiet, but the words hung in the air of my quiet kitchen. She works as a part-time administrative assistant at Peterson Development. An employee. His employee, not some impartial officer of the court, but someone whose paycheck he signed. The sheer, bald-faced audacity of it took my breath away. Mark hadn't just bent the rules, he'd snapped them in two and thrown them in the garbage. He had his own employee notarize it, I said out loud, the words tasting like ash. Sarah, who had been leaning over my shoulder looking at the property record, straightened up, her face a mask of cold fury. "Oh, that's it," she seethed. "That's not just arrogant, that's lazy and sloppy. He thinks he's untouchable." "He is sloppy," David's voice confirmed over the speakerphone. "And people who get sloppy are people who are desperate. Carol, this is the linchpin. This Janet Finch is his weak point. If she admits she knew Emily was not in her right mind when she signed those papers, his whole scheme collapses." "How do we get her to admit that?" I asked, my mind racing. "She'll just deny everything. She'll say Emily looked fine to her." "We rattle her cage," Sarah said, a dangerous glint in her eye. "People like that, the ones who help the bullies, they're not brave. They're usually just scared of losing their job, of making a scene. We need to make her more scared of the consequences of helping Mark than she is of him." And so the three of us hatched a plan. It felt like something out of a movie, sitting there at my little kitchen table with its sunflower print tablecloth, plotting to take down a real estate con artist. David would do a full workup on Janet Finch, address, car, schedule, favorite lunch spot. Sarah, being the closest to Emily's age and a master of disguise in the corporate world, would be the one to make contact. My job, we all agreed, was the most delicate. I had to get to Emily. I had to find a way to get past Mark and give her a lifeline, a tangible piece of her old life that might cut through the fog. David was ruthlessly efficient. Within 24 hours, we knew more about Janet Finch than she probably knew about herself. We knew she drove a 2018 silver Honda Civic, worked from 9 to 2 on weekdays, and every Tuesday and Thursday she went to the same little cafe, The Daily Grind, where she always ordered a turkey avocado sandwich on rye. She's a creature of habit. That makes her predictable. Sarah, she'll be there tomorrow at 12:15, like clockwork. Sarah's plan for the confrontation was brilliant. She wasn't going to go in yelling or making accusations. She'd play a role. "I'm a disgruntled buyer from the Avalon," she explained, pacing my living room and practicing her character. "My life savings are tied up in a condo that's nothing but a concrete shell and broken promises. I've been trying to get answers from Mark for weeks, and he keeps brushing me off, so I'm taking it to his staff." She had fake documents printed up, a phony sales contract, a list of complaints. She looked the part, radiating the kind of righteous indignation that would make any low-level employee extremely nervous. He thought his fortress was impenetrable, but he didn't count on us finding a back door. Don't go anywhere, because the walls were about to come tumbling down. While Sarah was preparing for her mission, I focused on mine. I called Dr. Ramirez's office. I didn't mention the loan or my suspicions. I played the part of the devoted mother, concerned about my daughter's lack of progress. I told the nurse that Emily sounded lethargic and more confused than ever. I laid it on thick, and it worked. Dr. Ramirez called me back that evening.
"You're right to be concerned," she said, her voice full of compassion. "I'd like to see her for a follow-up. Her memory might not be returning, but we need to ensure her general health is okay and that she's not regressing. Can you bring her in on Thursday?" "I'll have to check with Mark," I said, careful to sound hesitant. "He's, very protective of her schedule. You tell Mr. Peterson that I am insisting on this appointment," she said, her voice firm. I could have kissed her through the phone. She had just given me the perfect weapon. Armed with a doctor's order, I called the Lion's Den. Mark answered, smug as ever. I relayed the doctor's demand. He started to object, giving me the same old lines about not wanting to stress Emily. This time, I didn't argue.
"Fine, Mark," I said, my voice as calm and cool as I could make it. "You can explain to a neurologist why you're refusing to allow your wife to get necessary medical care. I'm sure she'll understand. I'll have her call you directly." Checkmate. He knew how bad that would look. An overbearing husband preventing his sick wife from seeing her doctor? Even he couldn't spin that into a positive. He backed down immediately, albeit grudgingly. "Fine, Thursday. What time?" He insisted on driving her, of course. He would never let her be alone with me, but I didn't care. All I needed was an opening. The next day was Thursday. Sarah, dressed in a sharp business suit and armed with her fake documents, headed to the daily grind. David was parked across the street, just in case. I was a bundle of nerves at home, waiting. My part of the plan would happen in a few hours, when I'd meet Mark and Emily at the neurologist's office. Sarah called me at 1:30. "Phase 1 is complete," she said, her voice buzzing with adrenaline. "What happened?" I asked, clutching the phone. It went better than I could have dreamed. I spotted her in the corner, just like David said. I went over and launched into my whole furious homebuyer speech. She went pale immediately. She kept saying, "I'm just the admin. I don't know anything about that." But I could tell she knew exactly what I was talking about. She knows the business is failing. Sarah took a breath. So I leaned in and I lowered my voice. I said, "I know he's a con man, and I know you know it too. He's taking advantage of people, Janet, and he's having his employees help him do it." Then I looked her straight in the eye and said the magic words. "I heard he even used you to notarize a loan document for his sick, mentally incapacitated ex-wife. That's a felony, you know. Obstruction of justice, fraud. I wonder if you'll still have your notary license after the state bar is done with you. I hope losing everything is worth it to protect a man who will throw you under the bus the second things get hot." I held my breath. What did she do? "She looked like she was going to throw up," Sarah said with grim satisfaction. She didn't say a word, just grabbed her purse and ran out of there. The seed is planted, Carol. We just have to wait for it to sprout. Now it was my turn. In my purse was not a wallet, but an arsenal. It was a small, slim photo album, one I had put together the night before. It wasn't filled with just any pictures. I had specifically chosen photos from the last 7 years, the years she couldn't remember. But critically, Mark wasn't in any of them. There was a photo of Emily and Sarah at their annual camping trip, a picture of Emily standing proudly in front of her new apartment door, holding up her own set of keys, a shot of her celebrating with her team after winning a huge design contract. And the last photo, the one I put right at the back, a picture of her from the day her divorce was finalized. She wasn't sad. She was at the beach with Sarah, toasting the sunset with a bottle of champagne, a huge, relieved, genuine smile on her face. This was my weapon. This was the life Mark was trying to erase. My plan was to slip it to her when he wasn't looking, a lifeline back to herself. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I had. I drove to the doctor's office, my heart pounding a steady, determined beat. War, I was learning, was fought on many fronts. The waiting room at Dr. Ramirez's clinic was painted a calming shade of blue.
but it did nothing to soothe the frantic thumping in my chest. Mark sat in the chair next to Emily, a possessive hand resting on her knee. He was on his phone, scrolling through emails with a furrowed brow, projecting the air of a busy, important man inconvenienced by this medical detour. Emily was staring at a generic landscape painting on the wall, her expression completely vacant. She looked thinner than I remembered, paler. The vibrant spark that had always defined her was gone, replaced by a quiet, heartbreaking passivity. He was hollowing her out from the inside. "Emily?" a nurse called out. Mark immediately stood up, ready to follow her in. "Mr. Peterson, I'm sorry," the nurse said politely but firmly, holding up a hand. "The doctor needs to speak with Emily alone for the initial part of the examination." The look on Mark's face was a delicious cocktail of shock and fury. "I'm her husband," he said, his voice tight with challenged authority. "I understand, sir. This is just standard procedure. The doctor will call you in for the consultation afterwards." It was clear the doctor had been briefed. She had given me my window. Mark shot me a venomous glare as if this were my doing, which, of course, it was, before reluctantly sitting back down. His mask was slipping.
As Emily stood up to follow the nurse, I caught her eye. I gave her a small, encouraging smile. In that brief moment, her eyes seemed to plead with me. "Help me." I didn't know if I was imagining it, but it was enough to fuel my resolve. Now was my chance. I sat down in the chair she had just vacated, my back to Mark. I could feel his eyes burning into me. I pulled the small photo album from my purse, my hands shaking slightly. "So," I said, my voice deliberately loud enough for him to hear, forcing a casual tone. "What exactly is the nature of your financial trouble, Mark?" He looked up from his phone, startled. "What are you talking about, Carol?" "The Avalon," I said, not turning to look at him. I kept my gaze fixed on the painting of the rolling hills, the liens, the angry contractors, the rumors that you're about to go belly up. Does any of that ring a bell? His silence was my answer. I could feel his panic radiating across the small space between us. I had just shown him my cards. He now knew that I knew. He recovered quickly, his voice a low hiss. "You don't know what you're talking about. You should stay out of my business." "It became my business," I said, finally turning to face him, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "when you forged a $500,000 loan in my daughter's name." All the color drained from his face. For a glorious second, the smug, arrogant Mark Peterson vanished, replaced by a cornered, terrified rat. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He was speechless. "You're going to go in there," I told him, my voice like ice. "And when Dr. Ramirez asks for you, you're going to tell Emily that you made a terrible mistake, that you were both grieving the end of the marriage and you got confused. You're going to tell her that she needs to come home with me to recover, and you're going to make it sound like it's your idea. Then you're going to undo that fraudulent loan. You're going to do it quietly, and you're going to do it immediately. Because if you don't, I will hand over my entire file on you. The liens, the loan documents, and a sworn statement from your pet notary, Janet Finch, to the district attorney. And I promise you, Mark, a librarian with a grievance is the most organized and relentless enemy you will ever have." He stared at me, his mind racing, looking for an angle, an escape route. He found none. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. He had built a fortress of lies, and I had just detonated the foundations. Just then, Dr. Ramirez opened the door. "Mr. Peterson, you can come in now." Mark stood up like a man walking to the gallows. He gave me one last look of pure, unadulterated hatred and then walked into the exam room. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat there, my heart pounding, rehearsing my next steps. When the door opened again, Emily came out first. Mark was behind her, his face ashen. "Mom?" said Emily, and her voice sounded clearer, more present than it had in weeks. "Mark, he thinks it would be better for me to stay with you for a while, that this house is maybe too much pressure." I stood up and wrapped my arms around her. She felt so frail. I held her tight. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made my knees buckle. "Of course, sweetheart," I whispered. "Let's go home." I looked over her shoulder at Mark. He would not meet my eye. He had been utterly and completely defeated. Getting Emily out of that house and back to mine was the first victory. She was safe. But the war wasn't over. A few days later, my new mail delivery confirmed our next move. Another letter from Silver Ridge Financial. I opened it with Emily beside me, explaining that we needed to look at it together. Inside was a statement showing the home equity line of credit had been closed and the balance was zero. Mark had blinked. He'd done exactly what I told him to do. He had quietly unwound the fraud, no doubt telling the bank some lie about a clerical error. He had sacrificed the money to save himself from prison. For Emily, the path to recovery was slow. Living with me, surrounded by familiar things from her real past, not the fictional one Mark had constructed, pieces of her memory began to surface in fits and starts. She'd catch the scent of the jasmine in my garden and remember planting it with me one spring. She'd see a rerun of an old TV show and recall watching the finale with Sarah. The little photo album became her Bible. She carried it with her everywhere, studying the faces and places, trying to reconnect the wires in her brain. The big breakthrough came about 2 months later. We were watching the local news when a story came on. The Avalon Condominium Project had officially declared bankruptcy. The screen showed footage of angry investors and home buyers shouting at reporters outside a locked construction site. The camera zoomed in on one of them, Mark. He looked disheveled, defeated, a shell of the slick man who had charmed my daughter. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide. "I remember him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I remember screaming. We were fighting. He told me I was worthless without him, that I'd come crawling back." A single tear rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. The wall in her mind had finally cracked. It wasn't everything, not yet, but it was the start. In the end, Mark lost everything. The bankruptcy led to lawsuits from his investors and the lenders at Silver Ridge. Without Emily's fraudulent loan to patch the holes, his whole financial house of cards came crashing down. He had to sell the house, our house, at a fire sale price just to cover a fraction of his legal fees and debts. The last I heard, he was living in a cheap rental across the state, facing civil charges. He got his justice, not in a dramatic courtroom showdown, but in the quiet, methodical dismantling of his entire life. The kind of poetic, karmic justice that is more satisfying than any revenge. And Emily? She's my daughter again. She eventually recovered most of her memory, though the moments right before her amnesia are still a blur, a trauma her mind still wisely protects her from.
With the money from her half of the house sale and a small business loan, a legitimate one this time, she finally started her own graphic design firm. It's thriving. She's dating a kind, funny man, an architect, who thinks her passion is the most incredible thing about her. She's laughing again. Her light, the one Mark tried so hard to extinguish, is brighter than ever. Sometimes, when we're sitting on my porch drinking iced tea, she'll look at me and shake her head. "I can't believe he almost got away with it," she'll say. And I just smile. "He never stood a chance, sweetheart," I tell her. He underestimated the librarian.
So another story of my grandmother has end. And be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.